Hi there guys, so today I wanted to give you another language tip, and it's something that I talk about a lot with my students. It's something that comes up really regularly. They always ask me sort of what vocabulary I should learn, whether I should learn this word or this phrase or anything like that. And I think it's a really important topic because it's sometimes can be really difficult to decide what you should be learning and what you shouldn't be, because obviously, languages are endless and it's really impossible to kind of learn everything. So today I want to kind of look at some tips and some tricks that I've found from language teaching and language learning that will help you decide whether vocabulary is useful or whether it isn't. So first of all then, it's really thinking about when we're talking about vocabulary, why you're going to learn it. So it's really important that it's kind of going to be useful. And that's really the first tip. And when I'm talking about all of this stuff, I would just say recommend generally you can use stuff like frequency lists and, lists of the most common vocabulary and all of that kind of stuff. But really, for me, at the beginning, that's going to be really applicable. But at a certain stage, that sort of frequency list is then going to become a bit irrelevant because your knowledge isn't going to fit into that common list. It's going to be very widespread, and then the reason that you choose vocabulary is also going to be very, very different. So I know a lot of people will say that they've got the 2,000 most common words in English and they're going to try and memorize all of them. That's great, but really I think that's can be a waste of time because there's probably going to be a lot of words in that list, especially when you start getting to 5,000, 10,000, etc. That a lot of those words are just not going to be relevant to you, or learning them in isolation in just a list is really also not going to help you actually use them any better. So personally, I think frequency lists are not really the sort of the best choice. How I would generally recommend it is first of all asking yourself, can I use this word, or can I think of a situation where I can use it? So basically, is it relevant to me? So to give you an example, I play video games in Italian. So my Nintendo Switch is set into Italian. And so there's a lot of vocabulary there which I learn because I want to play the games. And it's stuff that if you asked a teacher generally, they would say that it's not relevant. It's not useful in a normal conversation, which it isn't. But for me, one of the things I want to be able to do in Italian is to play video games. So the video games I play, there's a requirement of certain vocabulary there. So there's ones, or the certain games I like, strategy games like Civilization that I play require lots of vocabulary about sort of building armies and attacking cities and stuff like that, which in normal conversation I wouldn't use. And to think about that a different way, I don't like football. I know, crazy for an Englishman, but I don't like football. So I don't need to know how to talk about football in great detail in any language, even in English. And that's really an important thing, is just deciding, can you see a situation where you can use this particular piece of vocabulary? And so that's a really good way, because if you can sort of think, yeah, okay, I remember a situation I could have used this word, or I can see it being relevant in this situation at work or at home or whatever, then that instantly gives you a reason to learn it because you know it's going to be relevant. So that's really important. If you can't do that, then obviously you can talk to a teacher or a native speaker, and they can give you an impression of how common a particular phrase is. So there's a lot of phrases that are sort of grammatically perfectly fine that you'll find in a book, or you'll find in a particular website or a video or something. And you'll want to understand if this is actually something people say regularly, or whether it's just a strange phrase that person is saying, because not all phrases are going to be something that everybody says all the time. So native speakers and teachers especially will be able to give you a good impression of, from their experience or from how they use the language, of whether that phrase is relevant. So you can always kind of ask that one. But the best tip, and the sort of the main tip that I would give you, is remembering that new doesn't mean useful, or new doesn't mean important. So the reason I say this is lots of people will focus on learning new vocabulary, which is fine. The problem with that is that there's a lot of new vocabulary that you're finding that it's new because it's so rare and it's so uncommon, and it's maybe a very technical word, or it's only used in a specific situation. So again, looking at like lists of vocabulary, phrasal verbs are one that can't really commonly in English. And everyone says to me, I've got these list of all these common phrasal verbs and I'm memorizing them. And again, great, if you're memorizing vocabulary, that's brilliant, whatever you're doing really. But here we're trying to think about how we're going to make it more effective. And so if you think there's a list of 20 phrasal verbs or 20 idioms, realistically, you might only be able to find situations where you use 10 of those. The other 10 you're learning just because they're on the list. And it's one of those things, if you think about it from a native speaker's perspective, if there's a particular idiom or phrasal verb that I use once a year, is it really worth a student spending hours and days and weeks and months memorizing that particular phrase that me as a native speaker in the country, living the language every day, that I only use it once a year. Personally, I think no. I think it's better to focus on stuff that they can use a lot more regularly, either vocabulary that's going to help them watch TV or speak or write emails or whatever their particular goal is. And so that's really, I think, why I would say avoid focusing on new vocabulary. What I like to focus on is vocabulary that I completely understand but I don't use. And for me, that's a really important thing, because if I understand it, it's already in my passive vocabulary. I listen or I read and I get the meaning. But I look at it and say, I would never say that in conversation. I would never use that in writing. And that for me is the really important vocabulary, because I've already done half the job. I understand it. And now it's then going to be about activating and using it so that it's then available for speaking and writing. Because realistically, if I'm only ever going to use it when I'm watching a TV show or playing a video game, I don't need to do any more than that. Once I understand it, that's fine. When you're trying to memorize or learn new vocabulary, it's often for the practical skills, for the production skills, speaking and writing. So that would really be what I focus on. When you're reading or when you're listening, identifying phrases that you hear regularly and you don't use, and just trying to practice using them and activating them. And that's really going to be the best focus for your vocabulary studies, in my opinion. And also thinking about it this way, that if you've heard it enough, that you understand it, and you've also noticed that you hear it regularly and you don't use it, that shows that the frequency for you and how you use the language is enough to make it worth learning that phrase. Because again, if you watch a particular type of TV show, the frequency of certain vocabulary is going to be different if I watch completely different TV. So remember, it's all about your personal frequency, not just about sort of a standard list of what everybody does in that language, if that makes sense. So those are my general tips really for how I would focus my attention when I'm trying to study vocabulary. But I'd love to hear how you do it. Do you get a list of vocabulary for an exam? Do you use applications specifically? Or how do you identify what you should be learning? So put a comment below, and I look forward to sharing another language tip with you very soon. See you next time.